to the delight of the cat. The dining room of the Radisson Bleu Hotel of the Toronto harbourfront. It was to Suger's delight that the chime of 7 came. The sound produced upon the bell of the clock so anachronistically stood in the corner of the room, a reproduction of a French country long-case grandfather clock. The chime pealed through the air in a single harmonious ding. Yes, the peals of the bell, like a young girl's laughter, seemed to carry over the sound of the staff, music and delicate clink of utensils and china. Suger smiled wanly to himself. Yes, the chime of 7 was a delightful sound. Not even Juliet's anticipations for Romeo could compare to the significance of the delightful chime of 7. Satisfied, he enjoyed the visual feast that was the dining room of the Radisson. While it would never challenge the elegance of native France, nor the muted sophistication of Boyarsky's Russian aesthetics, the Radisson's Brasier Les Bourbons did not aspire to elegance, service, or subtlety. With 80 tables scattered around a marble fountain and a menu offering everything from steak frites to bouillabaisse, the Brasier was meant to be an extension of the city, of its gardens, markets, and thoroughfares. It was a place where the good citizens of Toronto could drift into dalliances, and where a lone diner, seated under a great glass ceiling, could indulge himself in admiration, indignation, suspicion, and laughter without getting up from his chair. And the waiters, like those of a Parisian cafe, the Brasier waiters could best be complimented as efficient. Accustomed to navigating crowds, they could easily seat your party of 8 at a table of 4, having noted your preferences over the sound of the orchestra. Within minutes they would return with various drinks balanced on a tray and disperse them round the table in rapid succession without misplacing a glass. If with your menu in hand you hesitated for even a second to place your order, they would lean over your shoulder and poke at the specialty of the house, and when the last morsel of dessert had been savored, they would whisk away your plate, present your check, and make change in under a minute. In other words, the waiters of the Brasier knew their trade to the crumb, the spoon, and the kopeck, if need arise. Today, Suger was attended by someone who appeared not only new to the Brasier, but new to the art of waiting. Tall and thin, with a narrow head and superior demeanor, he looked rather like a bishop had been plucked from a chessboard. When Suger took his seat, the international symbol of awaiting another diner to join him, the chap had tried to clear the second setting. When Suger closed his menu and placed it beside his plate, the international sign of readiness to order, the chap needed to be beckoned with a wave of the hand. And when Suger ordered filet of sole, the chap asked if he might like a glass of Sauterne. A perfect suggestion, no doubt, if only Suger had ordered foie gras. Perhaps a bottle of Châteauneuf de Baudelaire, Suger had corrected politely. His only response had been an ecclesiastical smile in brief, of course. Suger was not liking this boy, unimpressed at his laziness. Like so many, the bishop, as Suger had begun to think of him, no doubt only cared to do his job, get paid, and leave as quickly as possible. How modernity had ruined man and his drive. What shame. Looking now around the room, Suger sought some way to pass the time and cure himself of his suddenly soured mood. He gazed around the restaurant, but his fellow diners offered no relief to his growing sense of ennui. Across the way was a table accompanied by 2 stragglers from Parliament who were picked at their food while they pretended at diplomacy. Over in the corner was a spectacled denizen of the second floor with 4 enormous documents spread across his table, comparing them word for word. No one appeared particularly gay, and no one paid Suger any mind. That is when Suger felt his mood begin to lift. For a young girl with a penchant for powder blue who watched him, nearly spying, from the fountain, no older than 9 years old, with straight blonde hair, the daughter of a now widowed Canadian blue blood. The tiny heiress offered him a polite smile before approaching. Suger rose and held out her chair. Once she had taken her seat, he returned to his own. Merci, she said. Je tiens prêt. In the moments that followed, the waiter, the bishop, returned. Your soup, said the bishop. Ah, thank you, good man. It looks delicious, but don't forget the wine. Of course, said the bishop before he was off to fetch it. Soon after, the bishop returned with the wine, and shortly after, Suger passed both over to his guest. Her glass filled and food sampled, they exchanged light discussion, in which the young lass displayed impeccable manners. She, in the manner of an accomplished hostess, though perhaps lacking some tact, something her governess, or what was it? Nanny. Yes, he believed that was the word of this century, had failed in. Little issue, however, by comparison to the boorish behavior so prevalent now. She signaled the transition from pleasant conversation to serious conversation, her expression imitating that the time had come to speak on weightier concerns. In the case of young Teresa, she chose the word anyhow. As in, you're absolutely right, sir. Another evening of rain and the lilac blossoms won't stand a fighting chance. Anyhow. Her tone shifted, and Suger was ready. Resting his forearms on his thighs and leaning forward at an angle of 70 degrees, he adopted an expression that was serious yet neutral, so that he might, in an instant, convey sympathy, concern, or shared indignation as the circumstances required. I would be ever so grateful, Teresa continued, if you would continue my lessons in the rules of a princess and nobility. Suger expressed his sympathy and his pleasure at the grace with which she spoke. Ah, she had improved remarkably. But one flaw must be pointed out. The rules. Yes, the rules. Ah, but Teresa, Suger said with a smile, it is not a game. Teresa stared at Suger with an expression of patience. Lovely. Things were proceeding splendidly. I am certain that you know what I mean. Those things that are expected of a princess. Suger smiled more broadly. Yes, he feigned a moment's consideration. Well, he said after a moment, setting aside the study of the liberal arts, which we were discussing the other evening, I suppose the rules of being a princess would begin with a refinement of manners. To that end, she would be taught how to comport herself in society. She would be taught terms of address, table manners, posture. Teresa nodded favorably at the various items on Suger's list, but looked up sharply at the last one. Posture? Is posture a type of manners? Yes, Suger replied slowly. It is. A slouching posture tends to suggest a certain laziness of character, as well as a lack of interest in others, whereas upright posture can confirm a sense of self-possession and a quality of engagement, both of which are befitting of a princess. Swayed by Suger's argument, and again to his satisfaction, Teresa sat a little more upright. Go on. Suger merely reflected a moment. A princess would be raised to show respect for her elders. Teresa bowed her head towards Suger in deference. He smiled, but gently lifted her chin with his index finger. I wasn't referring to me, Teresa. After all, we are presently speaking in confidence, but well done, he complimented, giving her soft cheek a delicate pat before withdrawing his hand. Teresa nodded in understanding. You mean those who are grey-haired? She asked hesitantly. Well, yes, certainly them, but I mean elders of every social class. Maids, shopkeepers, the homeless. Teresa was hesitant now to express her sentiments with facial expression, but conceded to a frown. Suger elaborated. The principle here is that the new generation owes a measure of thanks to every member of the previous generation. Our elders paved roads, fought in wars, advanced the arts and sciences, and generally made sacrifices on our own behalf. So by their efforts, however humble, they earned a measure of our gratitude and respect. Teresa still looked unconvinced. Suger considered how to make his point, and it so happened that, at that very moment, a party of young women entered the restaurant. An example, he said, recalling times so long past that the memory was as the wax of a candle, melted and murky, not quite clear. Thus commenced a story of a princess, whom had been tardy to a ball held by one of her peers for giving a ride to a peasant woman in her carriage, a woman who later offered the princess tea and thanks, which the princess graciously accepted. The woman's son, the blacksmith, even repairing a wheel which had come loose during the ride. His point expertly made, Suger raised his hand and slowly spread out his fingers. His palm faced upward as though to present his tale, finished, to Teresa. "And then?" Teresa asked, looking at him expectantly. Suger lowered his hand. "And then what? Did she marry the blacksmith?" "Marry the blacksmith? Good God, certainly not. After a glass of tea, she climbed into her carriage and headed to the ball fashionably late." Teresa seemed to mull this over. Clearly she thought a marriage to the blacksmith a more fitting conclusion, but despite the shortcomings of history, as she would perceive them, she nodded in acknowledgment that Suger had delivered a well-told tale. "It was behavior befitting a princess," acknowledged Teresa. "Exactly," said Suger. Suger, giddy with his story's reception, called over the bishop to order 2 desserts for young Teresa. When he went away, a moment of silence passed. With a smile still on his face, he pointed out, curious to her reaction, "There is another example." "Where is another example?" "A princess would be raised to say please when she asked for a cake, and thank you when she was offered one." Teresa looked taken aback, and then dismissive. "I can see that please would be quite appropriate for a princess when she has asked for a cake, but I can see no reason why she would have to say thank you when she has been offered one. Manners are not like bonbons, Teresa. You may not choose the ones that suit you best, and you certainly cannot put the half-beaten ones back into a box." Teresa eyed Suger with an expression of seasoned tolerance, then, presumably for his benefit, spoke a little more slowly. "I can understand that the princess should say please if she is asking for a cake, because she is trying to convince someone to give her the cake. And I suppose, if having asked for a cake, she is given a cake, then she has good reason to say thank you. But in the second part of your example, the princess in question didn't ask for a cake, she was offered it. I see no reason why she should have to say thank you when she is merely obliging someone by accepting what they've offered." The desserts arrived just as she finished, and to punctuate her point, Teresa put a lemon tartlet into her mouth. Suger felt giddy once more, an invigorating sense of glee. "Then finish your dessert, darling Teresa. I have another offer you should be happy to oblige," he said, speaking wistfully. Teresa paused her chewing and gulped loudly. "And what may that be?" she asked. Suger reached out, taking her hand. "Do you still wish to have a sister?" The following evening, Teresa fought Suger's hands, which held her shoulders, her back pressed against him. He smiled, looking down at her, with all the delicate appearance of a porcelain doll. Her skin had such a radiant, milky whiteness now. Ahead of her was the bishop, held transfixed by the power of Suger's presence. "Do you want him?" Teresa fought and whined. "Do you?" "Yes, please, sir, let me have him." Suger smiled, watching the strings of her hair bounce as she struggled against him. "Then I shall give him to you, my child." He paused and stroked her cheek. "What do you say?" he asked coy. She paused for a moment, struggling for rational thought, but eventually it dawned on her, and a predatory glint came into her gaze. "Thank you." He let her go to indulge her new hunger, and mayhaps be due for another lesson, should she fail to control herself. The bell pealed, and Suger closed his eyes, savoring the moment. 'Twas to his delight.